It was just a text message, a notification about a package shipment, complete with a link to track the delivery. For Omar Abdulaziz, a Saudi dissident and Canadian resident living in Quebec, it was an entirely mundane occurrence. He had no reason to suspect that this seemingly normal link contained a digital weapon known as Pegasus, sold by the Israeli cyber arms company NSO Group. This spyware was developed with a powerful promise that it is only used to investigate terrorism and organized crime. But it operates entirely in the dark. Without any cooperation or engagement of the target, this software was able to remotely and covertly infect his phone. Once inside, Pegasus granted the foreign operator complete, unrestricted access to Omar's digital life. His chats, emails, family photos, and even his microphone and camera were instantly accessible, turning his smartphone into a constant surveillance tool. The consequence was terrible and swift. Omar Abdulaziz was a prominent critic of the Saudi government, and soon after his targeting, 2 of his brothers and several of his friends were imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. But this wasn't an isolated case. What we will be looking at today is the story of how a sophisticated tool sold for security purposes enabled a widespread, persistent, ongoing, and unlawful mass surveillance against dissidents and journalists across the globe, as well as ordinary people whom governments deemed worth watching.
Welcome to the Discovery Clock series.
In 2010, in the quiet tech hub of Herzliya, Israel, 3 entrepreneurs founded a small cybersecurity company. Their names were Niv Karmi, Shalev Julio, and Omri Lavie, and together they named it the NSO Group, an acronym formed from their initials. The idea seemed simple: to build tools to help governments track terrorists and criminals in an increasingly digital world. But behind that idea was something far more ambitious. A vision to make smartphones, the very devices we trust most, transparent to those in power. Israel had long been a center for cyber intelligence. Many of its brightest engineers came from Unit 8200, the Israeli Defense Forces elite cyber intelligence unit, founded in 1952, and often compared to America's NSA, or Britain's GCHQ. This elite unit trains people strictly between the ages of 18 and 21 and specialize in electronic surveillance and cyber espionage. Several of NSO's early employees, including 2 of its founders, had connections to this ecosystem. In that sense, NSO wasn't an outlier. It was part of a new generation of private companies, commercializing state-grade cyber capabilities. And at first, their goal appeared noble. As Shalev Julio would later put it, "We built this company to save lives." Period. The company's first major breakthrough came around 2011, when it began developing a tool that could infiltrate smartphones remotely. By 2013, NSO's early prototype could exploit mobile vulnerabilities through links sent by text message, an early version of what would become known as Pegasus. The name, inspired by the mythical winged horse, symbolized how the software could fly through the air and land silently inside a phone, much like a Trojan horse. They claimed their flagship software was only meant for governments to combat criminal activity such as to locate kidnapped children, to dismantle drug cartels, or stop terrorist attacks before they happened. And for a while, that narrative worked. In 2014, the company's growing potential attracted major investors. A private equity firm called Francisco Partners, based in San Francisco, bought a majority stake for around $120 million. Under their ownership, NSO expanded rapidly, licensing its software to government clients across the world, from Mexico to Europe and the United Arab Emirates. Within just a few years, what began as a small startup company in Israel had become part of a multi-billion-dollar global surveillance industry. And as the software evolved, so too did the consequences. Before we get into what Pegasus does, it's worth remembering just how much of our lives now exist inside a phone. It isn't just a simple device, it's a record of who we are, what we do, where we go, and who we see. All that content and metadata stored in one place. And that's exactly what Pegasus was built to exploit. The first thing to understand is how the software manages to get inside your mobile phone. There are two broad methods to it. One that tricks you, the classic spear phishing link, and one that requires nothing from you at all, the dreaded zero-click attack. Earlier Pegasus infections relied on convincing messages, a text, a web link. Click it, and your phone silently downloads the spyware. It's crude, but effective, and it gives the attackers plausible deniability in which the user clicked on the link and therefore was responsible for his own action. But it also leaves traces. That was almost the case in 2016, when Ahmed Mansour, a human rights activist from the United Arab Emirates, received suspicious text messages promising him information about the torture carried out in his own country. He didn't click on the link. Instead, he sent the messages directly to researchers at Citizen Lab, a multidisciplinary team based at the University of Toronto, known for investigating digital surveillance and state-sponsored hacking. What they uncovered would make history. The exploit chain, later dubbed Trident, used 3 previously unknown iOS vulnerabilities. Together, they allowed Pegasus to take complete control of an iPhone, read its messages, record its calls, activate its camera, and track its owner in real time. Apple would patch these flaws in iOS 9.3.5 just 10 days later. But the real leap and danger came from zero-click attacks. In a zero-click compromise, the target is not required to do anything. No link, no tap, no warning. Yet the device is infected. These attacks exploit previously unknown flaws or zero-day vulnerabilities in the software phones use to handle incoming data such as images, messages, even call signaling. One of the clearest public examples of this came in 2021, when researchers at the Citizen Lab analysed a mysterious new exploit they named forced entry. It was discovered after the phones of 9 Bahraini activists were found infected with Pegasus. The messages arrived silently, disguised as an image file sent through Apple's iMessage. The image was a hidden payload that would exploit a flaw in how iPhones process image data, a weakness buried deep inside Apple's core graphics library. Think of it like sending someone a picture, but the picture carries a tiny secret key that quietly unlocks the rest of their house. Citizen Lab traced the breach to a specific vulnerability, which allowed Pegasus to run a code on the device without any user interaction. What made it especially troubling was that it bypassed Apple's Blast Door, a security system specifically designed to isolate incoming iMessages and prevent zero-click attacks like this. Apple patched that flaw in iOS 14.8, but the message was clear. Even the most advanced security barriers could be breached by a determined, well-funded adversary, and it wasn't the first time this had happened. Back in 2019, WhatsApp had reported a similar vulnerability in its call function. Attackers could compromise a phone simply by calling it, even if the user never picked up. Around 1,400 people were targeted using that exploit before it was shut down. Pegasus's technical capabilities are on a modular level, meaning they're built like building blocks. Each component has a specific job. One handles infection, another escalates privileges to gain system-level access, Another ensures persistence so it survives reboots, and another exfiltrates data back to command servers. Vendors of such spyware invest heavily in stealth, wiping logs, rotating servers, and changing digital fingerprints to evade forensic tools. That's why independent forensic techniques, such as those developed by Citizen Lab and Amnesty International, are vital to confirm an infection has occurred. And here's the final truth: Pegasus isn't a single piece of software, it's a productized exploitation service. Clients buy access and support to the software, whilst NSO's engineers maintain exploit chains and deployment infrastructure. That commercial model changes everything. It means vulnerabilities could be reused, resold, and deployed at global scale, giving nation-grade hacking power to whoever could afford it. But tools like this don't stay forever in the dark. When a technology this powerful exists, it's only a matter of time before someone begins to investigate the footprints it leaves behind. In 2020, a story broke out that would send shockwaves through the world of technology and politics alike. After much investigations, an international coalition of journalists, working with Amnesty International and Forbidden Stories, revealed Project Pegasus to the world. A leak of around 50,000 phone numbers linked to a piece of software most people had never heard of at the time. The numbers on that list weren't random. They belonged to journalists, human rights activists, opposition politicians, lawyers, business leaders, and even heads of state. At least 24 countries appeared in the investigation, including France, India, Morocco, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, and Poland. Among the most haunting stories tied to Pegasus was that of Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi was a Saudi journalist, a critic of his country's leadership, and a columnist for The Washington Post. In October 2018, he walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. But he never came out. According to the CIA and the Washington Post investigation, Khashoggi was assassinated by agents of the Saudi government. His murder shocked the world, and it soon emerged that Pegasus may have played a pivoted role in the events surrounding his death. Forensic analysts from Citizen Lab and Amnesty International found traces of Pegasus on the phone of Hatice Cengiz, Khashoggi's fiancée at the time, as well as several people in his close circle such as Omar Abdulaziz, in the weeks leading up to and after his death. It was never proven that Khashoggi himself was directly targeted, but the surrounding evidence painted a chilling picture, one where digital surveillance blurred into real-world violence. The Pegasus leak also revealed that 14 world leaders had appeared on the list of potential targets, including the French President Emmanuel Macron and the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. In India, more than 300 verified numbers were identified, from opposition leaders to investigative reporters. Forensic work confirmed at least 10 active infections. And in Hungary and Poland, Pegasus had been used to monitor independent journalists and lawyers, the first confirmed cases of such surveillance inside the European Union. But nowhere was Pegasus used more extensively or more controversially than in Mexico. Mexico was one of NSO's earliest and largest customers. In fact, it was the first country in the world to buy Pegasus, back in 2011. Officially, the purchase was justified as part of the country's war against organized crime, a tool to help track the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas, and other drug trafficking groups. And at first, it seemed to work. Pegasus allowed investigators to intercept cartel communications, locate kidnappers, and follow money trails. The government reportedly paid tens of millions of dollars for licenses, with contracts spread across multiple agencies, including the Army and the Attorney General's office. But gradually, the target lists began to shift. By 2017, Pegasus was being used not only against cartel suspects, but against journalists, lawyers, and activists who were investigating government corruption. Among them was Cecilio Pineda Birto, a reporter covering cartel-linked crime. His phone number appeared in Pegasus's targeting data, just weeks before he was shot dead in March 2017. His phone was never recovered. By 2021, investigators from the Pegasus project confirmed that at least 15,000 Mexican numbers were linked to the spyware, by far the largest national share in the leak. It showed how a tool built for national security could so easily be turned inward, reshaping the line between state protection and state control. Across continents, the pattern repeated itself. Journalists in Azerbaijan, activists in Morocco, even Princess Latifa and Princess Haya of Dubai appeared in the database. However, not every number represented a confirmed infection. Some were simply marked as persons of interest, but forensic examinations of those devices confirmed dozens of successful intrusions, enough to prove that Pegasus wasn't a theoretical threat. It was real, it was global, and it was active. The Pegasus project forced the world to confront a new reality. That surveillance wasn't just the domain of intelligence agencies anymore. It had become a business model, one where privacy and power could be traded just as easily as software licenses. The NSO group denied any wrongdoing, insisting Pegasus was sold only to vetted governments for use against terrorists and criminals. But the scale of the leak told a different story.
What do you do when your customer has a definition of terrorist that isn't our definition? In some countries, the opposition are terrorists.
No such thing. Every customer that we sold had a very clear definition of what terrorism is. And it's basically bad guys doing bad things in order to kill innocent people, in order to change the political agenda. I never met with a customer that told me that oppositions are terrorists.
Well, they're not going to tell you.
But if they will act like that, they will not going to be a customer. There are more than 100 countries that we will never sell our technologies to.
In Europe, the revelations triggered one of the largest political inquiries of the decade. In early 2022, the European Parliament launched a special Pegasus committee, known as PEGA, to investigate the abuse of commercial spyware across the Union. Their findings were stark. At least 4 EU countries had misused Pegasus or similar tools to monitor journalists, opposition figures, lawyers, EU citizens, and EU officials. Those included Hungary, Poland, Spain, and Greece. But behind the outrage was a quiet, structural problem. The European Commission has no real legal power to regulate member states' use of national security spyware. Even when the abuse was documented, Brussels was limited to making recommendations and pressuring governments, but the legal enforcement had to come from the member states themselves. The EU could investigate, but not intervene. In the EU, member states such as Hungary, prosecutors and oversight bodies opened investigations. In one case, Hungary's National Data Protection Authority, the NAIH, reviewed whether the surveillance was lawful. But by mid-2022, the investigations were closed. The public prosecutor and NAIH found no criminal offence, concluding that the surveillance had been legally authorised. A separate complaint against one of the journalists who exposed the scandal was also dropped. Legal challenges followed. Civil liberties groups, notably the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, HCLU, filed lawsuits on behalf of surveilled journalists and activists, demanding disclosure of who authorised the surveillance, who was targeted, and which data was collected. Despite pressure from domestic civil society and international bodies, no top-level official has been prosecuted, and the surveillance industry had not been definitively dismantled. However, things turned out a little bit differently in Poland. The people elected a new government in 2023, and after years of allegations, the newly elected administration of Donald Tusk opened a formal inquiry into the previous government's use of Pegasus. Documents revealed that 25 million zloty, or 5.9 million euros, from a fund meant to help victims of crime, had been diverted to purchase the spyware. The scale was also larger than anyone had expected. 578 individuals were reportedly targeted between 2017 and 2022 by multiple Polish agencies. And for the first time in any EU member state, there were legal consequences. In October 2025, prosecutors charged the former Deputy Justice Minister, Michał Woś, for exceeding his authority in authorizing the Pegasus purchase, a case now moving through the courts. It was one of the first examples of real accountability in Europe's Pegasus saga. In France, prosecutors opened an investigation into allegations that Moroccan intelligence services used Pegasus to monitor French journalists, French officials, and the French president. In Mexico, multiple investigations were launched after the revelations. The most significant one came from Mexico's Attorney General's office, which opened inquiries into how Pegasus had been acquired and deployed. Forensic analysts confirmed the tool had been completely misused. But when it came to accountability, things began to stall. A few lower-level officials were questioned. Contracts between the government and NSO-linked intermediaries were scrutinized. And at one point, authorities even arrested the head of a small private contractor suspected of acting as a Pegasus reseller. Yet no senior government official was ever held responsible. No minister faced charges. And none of the agencies implicated in the surveillance were meaningfully sanctioned. Instead, the Mexican government repeatedly promised reforms, pledged that Pegasus was no longer in use, and quietly allowed the matter to fade into bureaucratic fog, whilst continuing to use Pegasus even till this day. Meanwhile, in the US, the fallout was more financial. In 2021, the Department of Commerce placed NSO Group on its entity list, the same trade blacklist used for hostile cyber actors and foreign adversaries. American companies were barred from selling NSO hardware, software, or services without special permission, effectively cutting the firm off from the world's largest tech ecosystem. US officials described Pegasus as a threat to national security and foreign policy. There were also reports that the FBI had tested Pegasus in 2019, but only to be able to figure out how bad guys could use it, which didn't please members of Congress. Ultimately, they abandoned the idea of deploying it, citing legal and ethical concerns. Apple also filed a lawsuit against NSO in a California court, accusing the company of targeting iPhone users with malicious spyware. Apple began notifying individuals it believed had been targeted, including government critics and journalists in multiple countries. But in September 2024, Apple sought the dismissal of its NSO Group lawsuit, citing a risk of exposing vital security information on the iPhone during the court case. Across continents, the pattern was the same. Some denied everything. Some prosecuted their own. But everywhere, the same question lingered. Who should have the power to hack a citizen's most private device? NSO Group was facing a mountain of legal and financial pressure. Its valuation, once rumoured to exceed $1 billion at its peak, plummeted into financial and reputational ruin. The company's CEOs ended up resigning. And in the end, in an ironic twist, the NSO Group was eventually acquired by US investors on the 10th of October 2025, after being banned from the country just 4 years earlier. The line between criminal and critic is thinner than we like to admit. The law is supposed to provide the guardrails, warrants, oversight, proportionality, independent courts. But Pegasus showed what happens when those guardrails are weak, captured, or ignored. A tool built for precision became a tool for power, and once governments learned they could use it against what they deemed their opponents, many did. It's the same dilemma we now see with predictive policing systems, mass data platforms, and surveillance tools such as Palantir. If a state can watch a particular group of people, How does an innocent individual know they aren't next? And if states can quietly collect the contents of a phone, then the question becomes even sharper. Should that power even exist at all? Because the moment hacking a phone of an individual becomes technically easy, the only thing preventing abuse is restraint, and history has shown restraint is often in short supply. The story of Pegasus is more than one company's rise and fall over surveillance. It's a glimpse into a future where that very surveillance is commodified. And as long as that market exists, there will always be another Pegasus waiting in the shadows. Hello everyone, thank you for watching the video and for your patience and support. Please consider subscribing and sharing the video, and as always, see you in the next one.